Well, thank you for everybody that's here with us today to have a roundtable discussion about Artemis mission and health in space. We're going to be exploring the consequences on human health in the context of short-term space travel. So a roundtable discussion by members and friends of the Medical Amateur Radio Council, also known as Healthcare Hams. Now, I do have on our website, on the entry page, under the post section, a copy of the slides that have the active links. So anything that one sees in today's presentation, you may be able to actively click on it by using the slides in healthcarehams.org. So the Artemis mission originated at Kennedy Space Center. And when we were there for hamcation back in February, and Fidel M0SFD, who's one of our members, and myself, we drove over there and got a chance to play with all the fun tools that they have there for interacting with the public. And the Artemis mission was actually was about 2 days away from launching in February, and they had to scrub the launch due to a technical problem. But I was able to get a photograph of it on the launch pad on that day, and actually there was a SpaceX launch that did go off a couple of days later. So there were two missions on the launch pads at the same time, and I captured an image of Artemis 2, how it appeared live. That's not an internet captured image. So next February, come down to Hamcation. We'll drive over. It's only about a 50-minute drive from the hotel that we usually stay at over to Kennedy Space Center. Quite easy, fun, nice thing to do in a day. We usually do that on Thursday. Now, in the past, the Grand Rounds, we've had discussions on space travel. I know Chip had mentioned that to me, reminded me we talked about the moon, we talked about medical science, the travel and habitation on the moon. That was back in January of 2024. And we did the same with Mars a couple of weeks later that January. The science, the travel, the habitation. A lot of what we talk about today on a smaller scale relates to what we talked about then. And it's a little different being a short-term mission versus a long-term mission. But if you go to those slides that are on our website, you can get direct links to the MP3 recordings from those two Grand Rounds. Also, you can use marcoaudio.net. Chip's recordings are there. Just go to those dates. The recording for January 14th and the recording for January 28th of 2024. The 14th being the one on the moon and the one on the 28th being for Mars. We'll talk a little bit about some of what was in the content for those days as well. But why would you travel around the moon and return? I mean, why go all the way there and not land? Well, you need time to test out new hardware systems, all the systems actually. I don't know about training astronauts and plumbing repairs, but they certainly had to get the toilet figured out. So imagine that on a way to Mars. It's hard enough. How many bags could you collect urine in if you didn't have a toilet that worked on your way to Mars? You'd run out of room real quick in bags as well. So we'll get that figured out. What about the heat shield progress? I know Artemis 1 had some problems with the heat shield. I mean, you don't want to burn up coming back in. So that needed to be evaluated. What about the effects in space? I mean, radiation, cosmic effects. And it's a short mission. We'll talk about that contextually. And it's practice towards the lunar landing. So we're sequentially going through all these systems and making sure that everything's working properly and we don't have to worry about that. But the effects of space, how and why do you evaluate health in such a short mission? I mean, the blastoff was April 1st. It splashed down on April 10th, and there's a diagram from NASA. And everything that we're using here in our PowerPoint is pretty much all just captured. It's open use, and everything's credited. So I've put the links to every single website or image in here, and we're just using it to direct you to that place on the internet. We're not taking that material and trying to co-opt it. But they did have a nice diagram that showed the mission and what it was going to do. It's the first crewed test flight to the moon since Apollo. On long-term space missions, the effect on the human organism is it still has a lot more further research because really this is the longest missions going to the moon other than the space station, which is in low Earth orbit. And if you go to this particular publication that I've posted, Long-Term Space Missions Effect on Human Organism, what we do know and what requires further research, you get an idea about that. And space is fascinating. It'd be nice to go there, but we need to also be sure of the effects on our body. And they had a chart in that particular one. The link to the chart is here. If you go to healthcarehams.org and look in the post section, talks about the different systems of the body's respiratory, nervous system, senses, musculoskeletal system, excretory system, reproductive system. I mean, the longer we go in space, the more this comes into play. So if you're doing a short-term mission, I mean, how do you qualify the changes? I mean, how do you make this connection? How do you go from the short term and predict? Is there a way to gain information leaning towards these longer mission questions that we have? So the main factors that change the functioning of the human organism in space are microgravity and exposure to cosmic radiation. So cosmic radiation, galactic cosmic rays, solar particle events. And you go on and read the description here. It's on the website if you search for that using Google or use the links. And it explains the physics of it and what the Earth's average annual natural radiation exposure is. And then it also contrasts to what the ISS and having a 6-month exposure would be as well. And that's like, 50 times, 25 to 50 times more exposure than being on the Earth for 6 months. But what about a Mars mission? A Mars mission just goes 10 to 12 fold above that. Now, it's a lot of radiation, and we have to keep everybody safe. And it's not like you can properly shield these spacecrafts. Everybody knows how much of an issue it is for having weight in space, getting things off the ground. So it talks about those 5 hazards in space, and if you go into the article, you can read about everything in full and complete. But the increased interest in space travel requires continued research, the effects on humans, going back to that question that we pondered a moment ago. How do you take a short-term mission and gain some information? Now, before Artemis launched, they did have a audio session with some experts that talked about keeping astronauts healthy in space. It was on planetary.org. And if you look up, Google it's 2026 Astronaut Health Experiments, Artemis 2. And they had a few experts going back and forth talking about all the different details, what one might look at. And they gave their take on why and shielding and how do you deal with it? Because you really can't shield, according to their expert. It's really isn't the answer because in order to shield it, the vehicle will have to be so heavy you couldn't fly it. And it's really not effective anyway because you're creating secondary radiation that's still going to dose the crew. So when they do their calculations, they set limits on how much the astronauts can acquire, and none of the Artemis missions are going to come close to that limit. So that's the good thing. But again, the whole point of the Artemis program is getting our way to Mars, starting with the moon first. Now, interesting that, and I think CHIP N5RTF may have alerted this to me, and I thought about it because 6 meters was very active, but they launched on the 1st, came back on the 10th, and on the 3rd, there was a major storm. The A index was 54, the K index was 5. So here you have astronauts, and they're, of course, not around the Earth already. They're already on their way to the moon, but they're in space, and they're certainly getting that same solar wind. Chip, do you want to try to describe some of what that chart says and what that means to have a high A and K index and the solar wind and the radiation? Let me turn the mic over to N5RTF.
Well, Actually, I'm just an old country doctor. I'm not I'm not a nuclear physicist. Um, but obviously, almost all of the radiation that we get on Earth, except for cosmic radiation, comes from the sun. So depending on what mood the sun is in, we get a little or we get a lot. Also, our shielding, Earth's magnetic field affects how much we get any given location on the planet. So once you get past that shielding, then you potentially can pick up all of the radiation that's coming from the sun at any given time for that area. But also, if you're in the wrong spot, the Earth's magnetic field can actually concentrate that, like at the poles. You have a concentration of all of those particles coming down at the poles. Fortunately, very few people live there, but it's keeping an eye on the sun, keeping an eye on the K index is just a reasonable thing to do, particularly if you're dealing with space in any way. And those particles are some of them are very energetic, and can do a lot of damage. They can break into they can break into smaller and smaller particles and do secondary damage. You get bremsstrahlung radiation, X-rays. So just it's deceptive when you look at the raw particles. You have to look at the secondary and tertiary effects as well. So it's just better to stay out of it if you can. And if you can't, one theory for going to Mars is to wrap water around yourself. You're going to have to carry drinking water and probably water for reaction mass because they're probably going to use some form of nuclear propulsion. So you'll have a lot of water on board on your way there and back. And the best thing to do would just be to roll it into a extended donut toroidal configuration and just put all of your people and biological things like plants and seeds in the middle of the water, and the water will absorb most of that and prevent the cellular damage. So that's about all I know.
Okay, thank you.
Comment.
Yes, go ahead.
When you talk about measuring radiation exposure, there is a distinction between whole body radiation, which is what you get in space travel, and radiation to a portion of your body. For example, if you have a chest x-ray, you're just getting the radiation to your chest, not the whole body. And it turns out that whole body radiation is way more bad than radiation to just one area of the body.
Thank you, Stuart. WA9ZPL. KO2M Dave, are you with us? Okay, Dave's not with us. Do we have any other comments from the group here?
There's an ophthalmological issue. It turns out that the radiation that astronauts and airplane pilots are exposed to is associated with an increased chance of cataracts and formation of cataracts at a younger age than would otherwise be the case. And this doesn't get publicized a lot. The treatment for cataracts is very, very good. But maybe Barry can explain that better.
WB1FFI, Barry, would any comment?
Just having a little trouble unmuting my microphone. Usually I can push the shift button, but it wasn't working. Yeah, no, Stuart makes a very important point. In fact, I had a conversation with a cardiology interventional cardiologist who is exposed to just X-ray radiation, not never mind cosmic and all this high energy particles. and they do a number of these procedures on a daily basis, and that is a real occupational hazard for them. They take some protective measures, of course, but that they are in the room or very close to the source of radiation. I haven't read up on it recently. They may have some eyeglasses that have some shielding, but Stuart is indeed true. Radiation cataracts are a problem. I couldn't give you the number, the dose level, or what, but especially even here on Earth with people who are exposed to it on a regular basis. So that's clearly just one of the many things that we have to be concerned about with the eyes. The good news about that is the cataract doesn't develop quickly. It's something that develops over time. But again, if we're starting to extrapolate out to long space missions, that certainly has to be taken into consideration. I think we're a ways off from that. Clearly, I think Artemis, the goal is in 2027, I think, maybe, or even 28 is the first landing that's planned. So there's going to be time to have all the brains people working on this stuff and seeing if there's new materials. We can't even envision the stuff that will be developed in the future to help solve some of these problems. And of course, with time, we discover new problems. So that's what's so fascinating about these projects and the spin-offs, is how much we learn of problems that we didn't even anticipate when we started, and getting people to work on solutions and so forth. So yes, Stuart, very good point. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. N4TSC, Jerry, are you with us? Would you like to comment? Perhaps Jerry stepped away.
No,
You. Go ahead, Jerry.
no, I was trying to listen on 20 meters and I wasn't able to hear anything, so I came to join the group. I would say that if you analyze what the problems are associated with travel, not to the moon, but to other planets, the problems associated with travel to Mars represent basically issues that are not solvable. The radiation that you would, as a human landing on Mars, that you would expose to would actually kill you in a relatively short period of time. And then the other issue is, how do you get back? There are whole different theories as to what you do to get the amount of chemical energy that you would have to take with you in order to be able to launch, to get to what's called escape velocity, and that is virtually impossible. There are designs that are under exploration to achieve enough energy to be able to move you through space. But then the other issue is that the timeline for a trip to Mars and return would be something in the order of a minimum of 3 years. And then you have to have an alignment of all of the bodies in order to be able to get back to Earth, and your window of opportunity is very limited. And so there are a series of problems that just make it impossible. And one of the discussions that I happened to see on YouTube by Neil deGrasse Tyson is that it is an impossibility. We are never, ever, ever going to have humans land on the Earth, go from the Earth to land on Mars and to survive and come back. That's just an impossibility. And there are a whole bunch of other issues that are associated with it. So I think that that we are going to be limited to just exploration and trying to achieve those things that we would want to achieve by using perhaps the moon as a base, and then developing through things like harvesting the water that's at the poles of the moon. You can break down the hydrogen and the water to hydrogen and oxygen, have that as a source of energy, and then you could have 3D printers printing the materials that you need over a long period of time, and then you could send robots out and you could create an exploration on that basis. But it is illusory to think that we will ever, ever, ever get to the point where we will be able to send a human to another planet and to be able to return it. That's just the way it is. It's the issue of physics. And interestingly associated with that, I happen to also see an explanation of the time-space continuum. And it turns out that we are using a three-dimensional analysis and looking at this thing completely wrong. The time and space seem to be reciprocals of one another, and that the term the speed of light is completely in error. It is just a constant, and the constant for the speed of light has just been taught as being 186,000 miles per second, but in fact it exists simultaneously everywhere. And so it's a whole different concept of time and space and so on. I find it all interesting, and I got into it because of the rediscussion of travel to the moon. But in fact, it is going to be impossible to send a human to the moon. And there's a whole bunch of other things that are brought up, because this was all in search of trying to define what gravity is. And you actually have to have a different model. We look at the model of time and space and so on based on Einstein's theory of relativity, and we're looking at it in a 3D format. But in fact, there's really a fourth dimension, and that tends to give you a different perspective on what's going on. So anyway, I'm just digesting some of this information now, and you asked for my comments, so that's what they are. Back to you, Joe.
Okay, go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Jerry. One way around that, which has been proposed, is not to come back. Our ancestors never expected to return to Europe. Throughout human history, when people take a big trip, they figure they would never return. We could send enough supplies in advance to establish a colony, and we could send astronauts who are in their 50s or 60s, if they're in good health, with the knowledge that they're never going to come back. They put that out as a trial balloon and immediately had thousands of volunteers. There are a lot of people that would be perfectly willing to go one way just to be the first on Mars. N5RTF.
Thank you. By the way, on Zoom here, we do have a chat feature. So you can post messages. Mike Dotson and for JL posted one about the neuroocular syndrome. So if you want to click on that, you can read about that. We also have Dave Rodman who's listening in here today, KN2M. Now, that's interesting. We were talking about health to be determined. We're not exactly seeing that being reported on what they're planning to do, but Chip, it kind of makes sense. We're talking about changes that might occur to human bodies. So over time, the body may be able to adapt. So it's not just a matter of impracticality of coming back, but by the time your body adjusts to living on another body, it won't be the same human anymore. It'll be a human that's learned to survive under different circumstances, and their physiology is going to have to adapt. So that's another question. And we talked about that back in 2024 on the two sessions.
Yeah, when do you become a Martian?
I don't know. How many days do you have to stay alive on Mars before you get to Martian?
When you turn green.
Okay, that's turn green. I turned green the first time I learned to do oral surgery, so I guess I'm already a Martian. At least the faculty accused me of that. But if you can evaluate the cosmic radiation, there's an article on that. So in short term, how just going into orbit for 10 days, uh, how can you evaluate what and extrapolate into longer term effects? Well, they had an experiment here on Artemis 2 using organ chips, which is devices, they call them Avatar, cute like the movie, of course. Astronaut-derived bone marrow cells to study the effects of deep space radiation and microgravity on human health. And there's a whole overview of this on science.nasa.gov of biological physical investigations. Avatar, you can search for it. So they're small USB-sized chips containing living cells to simulate human tissues in space. And of course, they're derived from the bone marrow of the particular astronauts that went. So it's designed to mimic the physiology and function of real organs, using the blood in this particular case, allowing researchers to study cellular responses to unique conditions of deep space, including cosmic gravity and radiation. So the purpose and significance is to understand how space stressors affect human tissue before sending astronauts on longer missions such as Mars. So the discussion that Jerry and Chip had is very appropriate if you come to the conclusion that we're not going to survive there under our current physiology. How can you adapt? And we covered this in 2024, particularly on the gravity side, that said, you're going to Mars, you've got a fairly reasonably long trip. I don't remember exactly what the shortest trip is, 9 months or such. And you're going to change gravity and you're going to go to a no gravity environment. And then you're going to be preparing to land on a body that has even less gravity than Earth. So wouldn't it be ideal if you could simulate gravity and make that transition? I mean, look at people that go mountain climb. You go to Everest, you don't just go straight to the top of Everest. You have to acclimate. So the question would be, if you can find out enough information on how it responds and analyze that, could we find a way that we adapt for that one-way trip Chip is mentioned about? As he said, there, being a psychiatrist, he knows there's people out there that would love to go and not come back. Look at the New World, right, Chip? People came over, a lot of them didn't go back. It was a one-way trip for them. So by monitoring the chips, the scientists can assess the DNA damage, immune responses, and blood cell production, providing insights into astronaut health and countermeasures. So the technology in operation, it's in a custom automated lab built by a company called Space Tango, and it's inside the Orion spacecraft, maintained at 98.6, and uses a microfluid network to deliver nutrients or remove waste, simulating natural tissue conditions, operating autonomously with astronauts interacting minimally just to ensure that continuous monitoring occurs during the 10-day lunar flyby. So you can go to spacetango.com. You can find the particular article, the latest Space Tango Artemis 2 Avatar Human Health, if you want to look that up and Google it, or you can go to the entry page for healthcarehymns.org, scroll down on the entry page on the right-hand column, look at the posts. The slides are posted there for today's discussion, and those slides have active links. So we talked about the significance already, but there's also on nasa.gov a 2-page flyer talking about the experiment in more detail. And you can find that as well. Look for assets, space.nasa.gov, and search for Avatar, and you should be able to find it. It's cute how they use the word avatar, like the movie. So what are the benefits, the research benefits, the personalized medicine for the astronauts? Because you're using their organ with their samples from controls on Earth. You can determine the individual's responses, see if it's different for everyone. Then you can make biomedical advances on Earth using the technology to accelerate drug testing, disease modeling, and cancer research. because the organ chips provide more accurate human tissue models than traditional animal studies. So we're talking about the exact human. That person is going back to Earth. It was their cells that were used. And it validates space health models, helps to correlate physical radiation measurements from dosimeters and CubeSats with biological effects. And I think the one difference on going to the moon versus the space station, and we talked about it before, and I'm trying to remember the term for that. I think the space station might still be the magnosphere. Chip, you talked about the particles and directed and how if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you get a lot more particles. Well, we're outside even more the protection of Earth on our way to the moon. So you have a higher risk here. So you can't exactly use the space station for the same research that you could use Artemis 2 for. So the future implications of successful can pave the way for larger scale organ-on-a-chip studies in deep space. You could do multiple tissue types and simulate entire physiological systems, reducing reliance on animal testing, providing highly relevant data for both space exploration and terrestrial medicine. And that's important because many advancements come from space travel, and the space program is very expensive. It, of course, a value to have a return on your investment. But in summary, represents a revolutionary step in space biology, combining cutting-edge tissue engineering with deep space exploration to protect astronaut health and advance medical research. Now, we think we're talking back to the space station. Not everything's predictable in life. The space station's been up a long time. We've never had anybody that had a problem like the astronaut suddenly being unable to speak that happened recently that resulted in the ISS first medical evacuation. The doctors still don't know what caused the issue. There's an article in Smithsonian Magazine that covers that. As far as I know, he hasn't had the problem again. They don't know why. Is there anyone that would like to comment on that from our group? Let me know.
I think you have a model for what the effects of ionizing radiation are from 1945. Just look at the survivors of the atomic bomb. There are some that at the time we used to call it REM or Roentgen equivalent man. Now we call him gray. Gray is about 1/100th of a REM. But you could take an analysis and figure out how much these people were exposed to, where their position was, what their radiation exposure was, and you can anticipate and then extrapolate from that what the likely survival would be. I think that the estimate right now is that you had a human on Mars because there is no magnetic protection from the poles as we have on the Earth. And since we don't have an atmosphere on Mars, or at least it's like 1/10 of what it is, 1/10 of 1% of what it is on the Earth, these things do not give you any protection from radiation, and you are absolutely guaranteed to shorten your life expectancy. And I'm guessing, based on the numbers that I've heard about whole body radiation right now, maybe a maximum of 2 weeks. And I don't see how you solve that problem. And therefore, you're basically telling people, okay, you can go for a look as a tourist, but you're really not going to accomplish very much.
I think back in 2024, Jerry, we talked about the possibility of residing in lava tubes to protect against the radiation. But then, of course, you could only go out at times when the radiation levels were lower. A solar storm would obviously pose an issue. What's your take on lava tube habitation?
You'd have to be very, very deep to be able to avoid the cosmic radiation, because neutrons, for example, pass through everything, and there's no way to avoid it. And so you're in a situation where it's just impossible to function. I think that these kinds of problems are just unsolvable for living cells. I think they just don't survive.
It's not an accident that Elon Musk owns a boring company.
And he also owns a robotic company.
Yeah.
So that also solves the problem.
Yeah.
But he's not being realistic about the possibilities, though. He's a con man. He's selling ideas. He
Well,
he's
he everything he's done so far has succeeded, so I'm not going to bet against him.
in the technological field, yeah.
Yeah.
But he's failed in the boring situation so far as a financial investment because it hasn't gone anywhere. He's had collapses and other issues.
Well,
That project hasn't worked.
that
He's just able to fantasize, that's all. And he has a whole bunch of engineers that are able to help solve the individual problems. And he says, okay, work on it. It's not he that's doing it. It's the assembly of the other engineers that engineering problems are solvable. But biological problems aren't. This is a biological problem that's not solvable.
Well, maybe they know something we don't know, guys. Maybe they're actually aliens that have come here and they've given them some solutions that we haven't figured out yet. But
I saw William Shatner on TV the other day, and he said that he favors using robots and not moving forward on plans to transport human beings to Mars.
knowing that, though, Stuart, can you radiation harden a computer to that extent when you're exposing it to that much? I mean, we do it on long-term space missions.
Well, radiation is a problem with computers, but not as much as with humans. At the Fukushima nuclear site in Japan, they tried sending in radiation-hardened robots to do some of the cleanup, and the robots were overcome by the radiation in spite of engineers' best efforts. So you're making a point.
And Jerry, you mentioned Hiroshima or Nagasaki. That's a sudden burst of energy. I know afterwards there's a chronic amount of exposure. But I think the dynamics of what goes on in space can be different. I mean, there's still acute episodes of solar radiation or cosmic rays. So I don't know if you can compare those as equivalents, though.
Yes, you can, because any exposure of radiation that you have is cumulative. It can be cumulative over a lifetime, and you can uh, uh, change the time component and make it a very short component, and then you can see what the effects are that would be over time. So the fact that you had an explosion, you were exposed to a certain number of, at the time we used to call it REM, you're exposed to a certain number of REM, and that had fatal effects for people who were survived physically, but then were burned. And the possibility of being able to find a solution to that biologically, as we exist as humans, does not exist.
Well, thank you for your input. There's a slide here from just telling a little bit of information about the lack of ability to find out exactly what happened to the astronaut who was having problems not being able to speak, and they hadn't been able to figure it out yet. So they're still researching. But what else did they do? They did CPR tests. So one of our members, Keith, I'm trying to remember Keith's call right now, but he's a flight surgeon, works with NASA. And I know part of his job was to work on the emergency medical kits for Artemis. And in 2024, we talked extensively about the differences between having an emergency medical kit for a moon mission where you could evacuate somebody to a Mars mission, although what we're talking about here tends to differ from what the plans for NASA is or are, which is actually going to Mars. I don't know how long they're planning on staying and how they're planning on overcoming what we consider to be perhaps impossible. But it's imagine being on Mars and what you would need for a medical kit. And if you go into that particular article, if you look on NASA spacenews.com, it talks about the fundamental obstacle to emergency rescue operations because of the distance. There's communication delays. There was also being able to evacuate would be impossible. So you'd have to rely on everything that you had there, and people would have to be trained. And I believe Chip and 5RTF, you had talked about this back in 2024, the emergency medical kit aspect and what they might need. So we can go back and listen to that audio recording and see what we talked about at that time. The heat shield we spoke about, the effectiveness of the heat shield, obviously it worked. They didn't think there was going to be a problem with the shield. I don't know if they've vetted it. It functionally worked. Doesn't mean that it was fully successful. That to be determined. But space.com had an article on this space shield issue, why they think it wouldn't happen again on Artemis 2. So the technological milestones of the mission here: tested Orion's life support systems, manual piloting, deep space communications, including a laser optical communication system. The mission's significance was critical test flight for future lunar missions, validating spacecraft systems, crew safety protocols, long-duration flight ship capabilities, and laying the groundwork for Artemis 3 and 4, which aimed to establish a sustained presence on the moon and eventually support Mars exploration. Not a one-time achievement, but a beginning of a new era in exploration. So thank you for covering the mission and returning to Earth with us. The discussion went in a direction that I didn't anticipate. I really didn't expect hearing that we had an impossible situation on our hands, and a lot of money is being spent towards coming up with solutions. So I'd like to think somebody knows something more than we do, but well, maybe they're just working towards robotic exploration. We'll find out. Time will tell. We also have a YouTube channel. Don't forget, we have our videos, including the one from today, on the channel. Any further comments from the group that's here? Make a list. Go ahead.
Comment?
Here we have Stuart, WA9ZPL. Go ahead, Stuart.
We were hearing about people in their 50s and 60s that volunteered to go to Mars with no possibility of returning to Earth. I'd like to ask Chip whether these people had a psychiatric disorder known as fugue.
No, it's just some people, prize novelty and being first at something more than they do life itself. Plus, it's pretty exciting. If you could get five or 10 good years on Mars, say living in underground tunnels or whatever, just to protect yourself from the radiation, but still exploring and doing new things. And most people would rather do that than spend it in a retirement village. I think you'd have a lot of takers. People have always been willing to go out and do something exotic, even if it has a high chance of failure. Look, Lindbergh made it, Amelia Earhart didn't. But they were both driven by the same goals. In 5RTF.
Thank you, Chip. We also had Dave KN2M who sent in some information on the neuroocular syndrome. And there was a JAMA article concerning the female astronaut who had the manifestations of the syndrome. So you certainly can look that up. He also mentioned he had a colleague, Dr. Andrew Lee, a well-known neuro-ophthalmologist in Houston, who had considerable experience with that syndrome. So people are looking into these details, and it will become more and more likely. And an ischemic TIA, was highly likely. It's quite possible that happened, but they haven't commented on the cause, that they knew the cause. Any other comments about what happened to the astronaut that they had to evacuate from the space station?
Well, we know that deep vein thrombosis is common after prolonged airplane travel, and maybe it occurred after prolonged space travel. Deep vein thrombosis in the legs wouldn't cause a TIA unless the person had a so-called paradoxical embolus due to a hole in the heart known as a patent foramen ovale. So I would like to know if this astronaut underwent evaluation with a contrast echocardiogram to rule out patent foramen ovale.
Are
guess
people born with that and you have to, there's a natural closure and that you would pick that up on the general exams that these medical exams these people have to go through before they are accepted into the Corps.
The way you pick it up is by listening for paradoxical splitting of the second heart sound, and 99% of physicians are not skilled at picking it up in this manner.
Well, thank you for the input there. Hopefully, we'll see more results of what happened, and hope it'll never happen again. It's been a lot of years. The space station's been up there. We haven't had any more problems. Any other comments from anyone?
Yeah, the people that are circulating the Earth in low Earth orbit are being exposed periodically to the Van Allen belt, and they're getting exposed to long-term radiation, and the effects of those can probably be extrapolated. And then at that point, you could probably work out what the survival time might be for a human if we were able to land on Mars. Notwithstanding all of these negatives, the effort to try to get and solve these problems has secondary benefits throughout society, and we've seen them in the last 50 years. The phone that you're using, whether you're using an iPhone or an analog phone, doesn't have 1/10 of the computer power that the vehicle that they used 50 years ago. So there are all kinds of, that's just a simple example of the benefits that we get out of making the research and trying to solve the problems. So making the effort is worth it. Selling the idea is what Elon Musk is trying to do. And I see that as a con of people who just don't understand.
I know his pay grade's well above mine, so I'm not one to comment on it. Well, thank you for everybody's input today. I haven't picked a discussion topic for next week. I'm going to stop the recording here. Thank you for everybody that was visiting here on YouTube. We appreciate that. We do meet weekly, the Medical Amateur Radio Council, and feel free to look at the other videos on our channel. Thank you for participating today or monitoring us today.